for educational critical review and reaction is the late, great Jordan Maxwell.
Nicholas de Very, he was a Grand Master of the Dragon's Legacy, or the Dragon's Court in Europe. Sir, what was his name? What was the name of that writer that died, that did all the work on bloodlines? Do you remember? Who was that? I can't remember his name right now. Sir Lawrence Gardner. Lawrence Gardner. So Lawrence Gardner wrote quite a few books, large books about the bloodlines of the Holy Grail, about Jesus, bloodlines, etc. And very famous author, and I know him well. We did some lectures together. Well, I found out later that Nicholas de Very was a co-author in Europe with Sir Lawrence Gardner. But Lawrence Gardner didn't tell Americans that most of the knowledge that Lawrence Gardner was bringing out in his books that we were reading here about the bloodlines of the royalty of Europe and the royalty of the bloodlines of Jesus and all that kind of thing, he was getting a lot of his information from Nicholas de Very, who was a Grand Master in the Dragon's Court in Europe, a secret society, a very powerful ancient old order where they worshiped the dragon, the reptile alien gods. And this is a very legitimate society. And this is what was his name? And they called him Vlad the Impaler. Who was this? What was the term they gave him? Dracula. Dracula was actually a real man. He was a prince, and he was very bloodthirsty. And but he belonged to, and at the time, Dracula was the head of the Dragon's Court. Today, Nicholas de Very is the head of the Dragon's Court. And so Nicholas talks about, his book is called The Dragon's Legacy, The Secret History of the Ancient Bloodlines. And the bottom it says he's a Grand Master, Imperial Royal Dragon's Court. And so, as I said, he writes a lot about the concept of the reptile aliens who have ruled Europe behind the scenes. Wouldn't surprise me. Of course, in statues all over the world, statues of aliens, reptile aliens. I saw this one in England when I was in England speaking on tour. I went to a UFO exhibit. This guy had an incredible museum of all kinds of reptile aliens. And on the back wall, he would have the quotes from the reference books, from the Bible and reference books, describing, what you were seeing. So it wasn't like he was making these up. He was just showing you where this information came from and then design creatures that looked like what was on the document. And you see the connection between the ancient reptile dinosaurs and what the human evolved could possibly look like. And as I said, there are statues all over Europe implying that humans are being dominated by reptile aliens. Quetzalcoatl, also pictured as a reptile in Mexico. This is in, I think it's in Finland. One of the Nordic countries where it shows a man being molested by a reptile alien.
Is it Gustav Land in Oslo?
Yeah, could be. That's right. It's in Oslo. And now the woman.
Yeah.
Incredible. The eyes of reptile aliens, reptiles, first of all, reptile eyes. The large eye aliens that we are told, and the ancient people made statues of these alien creatures they said they saw. Here's one from Kosovo, going back to the Neolithic period. You see, it looks like an alien with the skin, the eyes. Why would these ancient people make representation of these creatures that they saw and they look like reptiles because they very well might have been reptiles. This is from Sumeria, the old Babylonian, Akkadian, Sumeria area of the world, Middle East. Quite literally, a reptile head, reptile eyes. Lord of the Rings makes the reptile eyes. That's pretty extraordinary stuff when you think about the possibility that maybe there have been for thousands of years before humans were on the earth, this may have been inhabited by a reptilian race. The human brain, between the two lobes of the human brain, down the middle, there is something called the reptilian brain. I've talked to doctors about this, and they say, yeah, that's the correct term that's used. There's a part of the human brain between the two lobes in the middle called the reptilian brain. And they say that when the human is developing in the womb, that it develops like a reptile. It's a tail, it has all the accoutrements of a reptile, lizard, or whatever, and then it begins to fill out and become more human. But when it's actually in the formative stages, it looks like a reptile. And then, of course, we have a reptile complex in the brain called the reptilian complex in the brain. So, you got to wonder, why would science and medical science call this area in the brain the reptilian? Also in comic magazines, obviously, all kinds of comics over the years have always shown reptiles actually at war, wearing uniforms. So they're not just animals, they are actually intelligent creatures. Aztecs and Mayas. Now the strange crescent heads that I talked about, these strange crest heads, is what caught my attention many, many years ago. Matter of fact, I did a video on this quite a long time ago, but I think it's so important I'm redoing it. The same idea of this crested head, this crest on the heads of reptiles and birds also. Birds are connected to the reptile world. So when you see these reptiles with these crested heads, I picked up on this, as I said many years ago, thinking about this, and wait a minute. Crested heads. Here's a skull. You see the crest is a natural part of the skull. Natural part of the skull. This is not that important because we see it in all the reptiles until you start applying it to humans. Now, once we've established this is a reptilian trait in reptiles, here is called a helmeted lizard. But you'll see the reptile connection between the reptile alien and the lizard with the crested head. Then, as we saw just before, from Sumeria, you'll see these reptile gods, men and women, crested heads. The heads of these figurines were styled by some, they look reptilian, lizard-headed. And I'm just of the opinion that people back in the ancient world, were not dreaming this up for Hollywood. They were just making statues of things they've actually seen. So I would be, as I said, wouldn't be a bit surprised if there are and has been on this earth intelligent reptilian creatures on this earth. That's what our ancient ancestors were trying to tell us. But this crested head bothered me because I see it in not only magazines and cartoons, but then you begin to see it in everywhere. This crest on the heads of these aliens. And they're always green, the reptilian. Then here's a giant statue in Persia with the crest on its head. prehistoric pictures drawn on walls with crested heads. This is a disc that was found in the Middle East. And on this disc, a lot of interesting symbols on this disc, but one of them is a man with a crested headdress. And of course, here in the Aztecs and the Mayas, they have their gods with this crested head. And here's a deity, the serpent having a plume on its head. So the more I got into this whole idea, this plume or crested head on these gods, and there's a serpent with the symbol too. The Aztecs and Mayas also had their gods had crested headdresses, which is implying, in my mind, that there's some connection between that normal thing which we see on reptiles and it's applying it to humans. And so here's one of the ancient gods of the Assyrians with that same idea of the crested headdress, crested head. In Africa, some of the gods, modern day. And then, of course, the Greeks and the Romans, their helmets with crested headdresses. So when you think about how this whole idea of this crested head has matured through the ages for thousands of years, and even the Mohawk Indians, the Mohawks had the same style headdress. So I begin to suspect that there might be something to this idea of a connection between here in Hawaii, gods. But what is the connection with these, with this symbol of the powerful gods in all the different nations of the world? And of course, this is in Hawaii, but then of course you have in Tibet. The Tibetans also have the same idea. So the question has to be asked, is it possible that there has been some kind of a interfacing of humans with extraterrestrials and reptile aliens? I think so. I think that's what's happened. And I think they're here. Now, I'm totally sure because I've heard, well, as I said, way too many stories that validate the idea that they are here.